The courtroom lights felt harsher than any operating room I had ever worked in. Cold, white, unforgiving. My stethoscope had been traded for a suit, and instead of a patient's heartbeat, the only rhythm I heard was the pounding in my own chest. Across the room sat my family. Blood that once meant comfort, now sharpened into blades. My brother leaned back in his chair, smug smile stretching like a scar across his face. My mother avoided my eyes, siding with silence. And my sister? She whispered something that made them all chuckle, as if this was a game they had already won. They thought today would break me, that stripping away everything I had built, my clinic, my name, my independence, would leave me crawling back to them, begging for scraps. But as the judge's gavel prepared to fall, I held the one thing they never saw coming. They believed I was powerless. They had no idea I was about to rewrite the ending. Before the courtroom, before the betrayal, before the laughter that cut deeper than any scalpel, I was just a doctor trying to build something of my own. My clinic wasn't fancy. It didn't have marble floors or gold-trimmed doors like the private hospitals across town. But when I opened those glass doors each morning, the scent of antiseptic mixing with the faint sweetness of fresh flowers left by grateful patients, I felt pride swell inside me. The walls weren't just painted white. They carried the fingerprints of every late night I spent fixing, scrubbing, and painting them myself. This place was more than four walls. It was proof that I had made it without handouts. Every stitch in a patient's wound, every prescription written with a trembling but hopeful hand, it all became part of the heartbeat of that small clinic. My family never understood. To them, success wasn't about service. It was about ownership, power, control. My brother, Samir, had always been the golden child, charming, reckless, the type who crashed cars and had them replaced within a week. My sister, Aisha, followed my mother's shadow, always agreeing, always careful to never outshine. I, on the other hand, worked in silence. When they went to parties, I stayed in the library. When they spent money, I saved it. I still remember the old glass jar I kept under my bed as a teenager. A simple piggy bank, no lock, no key, just coins and crumpled notes I collected from tutoring younger kids after school. Every rattle of that jar meant I was one step closer to independence. Years later, when I finally held the deed to my clinic in my hands, I thought of that jar, proof that even small beginnings could grow into something real. But in my family's eyes, independence was betrayal. It began subtly. My mother would say, "Why open a clinic in that part of town?" "It's beneath us," Samir would laugh when he drove past, rolling down his window just long enough to shout, "Still playing doctor in that shoebox?" Aisha said little, but her silence was worse than words. It told me I would always be the outsider, even among my own blood. I brushed it off. Patients trusted me. The neighborhood respected me. That was enough. Until the first sting came. It was during Eid. My clinic had just celebrated its first year, and patients had surprised me with sweets and cards. I walked into my parents' house carrying a box of mithai, smiling. Family gathered in the living room. Relatives, cousins, the usual chaos of overlapping voices. My brother stood in the center, boasting about some new business venture my parents had financed. They applauded him like he was a king returning from conquest. When I placed the box on the table, my mother frowned. "Don't bring this cheap stuff," she said loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "We already have proper sweets." The room went quiet. My cheeks burned. I looked at my hands, sticky with syrup from the mithai box I had bought with my own hard-earned money. My brother smirked, sipping his tea like he had won something. That moment stayed with me, the humiliation of standing invisible in my own home, the sharp taste of rejection coating my mouth. It was small, petty, but it foreshadowed everything that was coming. Because if they could dismiss my efforts so easily in front of others, what would stop them from trying to erase everything I had built? I didn't know it then, but the battle lines had already been drawn. Cliffhanger ending. Because if they could dismiss my efforts so easily in front of others, what would stop them from trying to erase everything I had built? The petty insults should have been easy to ignore. After all, I was used to being the quiet one, the overlooked one. But something shifted when my clinic began to grow. Word spread quickly. Patients who once struggled to afford private care found comfort in my clinic. Mothers brought their children, laborers came after long shifts, and slowly the waiting room was never empty. The sign above my door, simple black letters spelling Doctor, Khan's family practice, became a name people trusted. And that trust, it made my family restless. It started with whispers. A cousin hinted that my brother was telling people my clinic was unsafe, that my equipment was second-hand and unreliable. A neighbor mentioned overhearing my sister say I had cut corners to save money, risking patients' lives. At first, I dismissed it as jealousy, but soon the whispers grew into shadows that followed me everywhere. One evening, a long-time patient didn't show up for her scheduled appointment. When I called, her voice trembled. "Dr. Saab, I'm sorry. Your brother said you don't have proper qualifications. He told us not to come." I hung up the phone, the receiver heavy in my hand, and for the first time, doubt gnawed at me. The pressure only mounted. Anonymous complaints were filed with the local health board. Inspectors arrived unannounced, combing through my records, checking every vial, every certificate on the wall. I knew I had nothing to hide, but the humiliation of being questioned in front of my staff left me sleepless that night. And behind it all, I saw the smirks. Samir's voice echoing in my head. Still playing doctor in that shoebox? The more I resisted, the harder they pushed. Family gatherings became battlegrounds disguised as tea parties. My mother would sigh loudly whenever I entered the room, telling relatives, if only she listened, she wouldn't have to struggle. Samir bragged about new investments, using money he hadn't earned, wearing suits he hadn't paid for. Aisha nodded along, careful never to get her hands dirty, but her silence was its own betrayal. The isolation was suffocating. Patients trusted me, yes, but blood is a different kind of bond. At night, lying in bed, I would stare at the ceiling fan turning slowly and wonder if maybe they were right, if maybe I had built my clinic on fragile ground. My chest tightened with each spin of the blades, breath caught between pride and despair. It was during one of those nights, when exhaustion felt heavier than the air itself, that I almost broke. My hands trembled, the weight of my stethoscope on the bedside table suddenly unbearable. I thought of that piggy bank jar from my childhood, how fragile it was, glass that could shatter with one careless touch. Was my life's work the same? And then the spark came. Her name was Mariam, a fellow doctor, younger than me, but with a sharp mind and a heart that burned with the same stubborn fire. She had once been my student, shadowing me during her training years. Now she walked into my clinic one evening, her hijab slightly crooked from rushing, her eyes bright with determination. "I heard what they're saying about you," she said without hesitation, "and I don't believe a word. You taught me integrity. You taught me that medicine is about people, not money. If you think I'm going to sit by while they try to destroy you, you don't know me." For the first time in months, my chest loosened. Someone had seen through the fog of lies. Someone had chosen me, not out of obligation, but out of conviction. I remember gripping the edge of my desk, my knuckles white, and whispering back, "Thank you. You don't know what that means." Mariam smiled softly. "Maybe I do." That night, as I locked the clinic doors, the shadows didn't feel as heavy. The whispers still circled, but they no longer pierced as deeply. Because that was the first time someone reminded me I wasn't alone. Cliffhanger ending. Because that was the first time someone reminded me I wasn't alone. It wasn't enough for them to smear my name. My family wanted control, complete and unquestioned. The turning point came one sticky afternoon in July. My clinic was packed. Children crying, fans humming, the faint scent of antiseptic trying to mask sweat and heat. That's when the messenger arrived, a stiff white envelope bearing the family seal. Inside, a summons, a family council. Not just tea and gossip this time. An official meeting chaired by my uncle, attended by every elder whose voice carried weight in our community. The message was clear. I was being called to account. When I walked into my parents' house that evening, the air was heavy with cologne, incense, and judgment. Men in pressed shalwar kameez sat in a semicircle, women whispering behind dupattas. At the center sat Samir, legs crossed, smirk fixed like armor. My mother at his side, face calm but eyes sharp. "We are here," my uncle began, "to discuss what is best for the family. The family, not me, not my clinic. The family." Samir spoke first, his voice dripping with false concern. "She's wasting resources, chasing independence when she should be contributing to the family business. It's selfish." Unwise gasps of agreement followed, murmurs spreading like wildfire. I tried to speak, to explain that my clinic wasn't theirs to control, but my mother cut me off. "We gave you everything, education, shelter, our name, and this is how you repay us? By dividing us?" Every word was a blade. By the end of the meeting, they presented me with an ultimatum: hand over partial ownership of my clinic to the family, on paper, to ensure unity. Refuse, and they would pursue legal action to prove I had used family funds to build it. The room was silent, all eyes pressing against me, waiting for me to break. My throat was dry, my heartbeat thundered in my ears. For a moment, I almost faltered. Almost. But then, I remembered. The deed. Years earlier, when I scraped together every rupee from tutoring, from scholarships, from part-time work, I had vowed never to let anyone take credit for my dream. When the clinic opened, I registered it in my name alone. No co-signers, no silent partners. Every receipt, every transfer, every tax record meticulously filed in a folder that now sat in my desk drawer at the clinic. Proof. So I straightened my shoulders and met their eyes. "You want ownership?" I said quietly. "You'll need to fight the law for it. Because this clinic was built with my sweat, not your money." For the first time, Samir's smirk faltered, just for a flicker of a second, but it was enough. The elders murmured uneasily. Some shifted in their seats. My uncle cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the open defiance. My mother's face hardened into stone, but instead of backing down, they doubled down. The following week, I received notice from a lawyer, my own brother's signature at the bottom of the complaint. They accused me of financial mismanagement, of using family inheritance funds to launch the clinic. They demanded audits, documents, explanations. Patients noticed the stress. My staff worried. The shadows crept back in, darker this time, thicker, pressing against every breath I took. And yet, somewhere beneath the fear, a spark glowed. Because unlike them, I wasn't fighting with lies. I had proof. I had allies. I had Mariam, who stayed late to help organize files, who reminded me to eat when the weight of the world pressed too heavy. One night, as we sat surrounded by stacks of folders and coffee cups, she said quietly, "They think they've trapped you, but they don't see how prepared you are. You have everything you need to fight back." Her words settled in me like steel. They thought they still had control. They didn't. Cliffhanger ending. They thought they still had control. They didn't. Once the lawsuit was filed, the war no longer hid behind family walls. It spilled into the streets, into whispers outside mosques, into the ears of patients waiting at my clinic. Samir and my mother became generals, orchestrating a campaign of rumors so sharp it cut into my livelihood. They told neighbors that my clinic was unsafe, that medicines were expired, that I cared more for money than patients. They recruited relatives as their soldiers, flying monkeys, Mariam called them, people willing to repeat lies simply because it gave them a seat at the family table. At weddings, I felt eyes burning holes into my back. At grocery stores, I overheard, "Did you hear? Even her own family doesn't trust her." The humiliation I had felt that Eid with the Mythi box seemed like a child's wound compared to this. This was character assassination, a public stripping of dignity. But if they expected me to crumble, they miscalculated. The sleepless nights, the pounding headaches, the stress that once left me trembling, they hardened into resolve. My clinic was no longer just a building. It was a fortress, and I was done defending it passively. So I became a strategist. I documented everything, every false rumor, every patient who mentioned being told not to trust me, every anonymous complaint filed with the health board. I created files, labeled and dated, neat as surgical sutures. Mariam helped me design a system, spreadsheets, timelines, a wall in my office plastered with sticky notes mapping out their entire campaign against me. The piggy bank jar resurfaced in my mind. That symbol of discipline, of one coin at a time, became my method. Piece by piece, I built my case. But war wasn't fought only with paper. It was fought with presence. I doubled down at the clinic. Longer hours, more free checkups for families in need. I partnered with a small NGO to provide vaccinations for children. Every act of service was both shield and sword, a reminder to the community that my work was real, my commitment unshaken. Meanwhile, cracks began to show in my family's armor. Samir, in his hunger for control, pushed too far. He borrowed money to fund his business ventures, promising profits that never came. Relatives who had once sung his praises began to whisper doubts. My mother tried to cover for him, but whispers of his recklessness spread as fast as the lies he had told about me. The irony was bitter. The very people who had accused me of dishonesty now stood behind a man drowning in debts he refused to admit. Still, they pressed on. One night, I returned to my clinic to find the lock broken, drawers open, files scattered across the floor. My stomach twisted as I picked through the papers, searching. The deed, the receipts, the folders that proved my independence. For a terrifying hour, I thought they were gone. But then I saw it. The blue folder kicked beneath the desk, dusty but untouched. My fingers trembled as I held it close, my breath ragged. They were desperate. Desperate enough to break in, desperate enough to steal what they could never earn. That night, as I replaced the broken lock, I realized something. This wasn't just about money or ownership. It was about control, about silencing me before I proved that their empire was built on sand. And it meant one thing. The day of reckoning was coming, and no one could stop it. Cliffhanger ending. The day of reckoning was coming, and no one could stop it. The courthouse smelled of paper and sweat, an odd mix of bureaucracy and fear. The air conditioning rattled weakly, failing to chase away the heat of so many bodies crammed into one space. I sat at the front, shoulders squared, while my family gathered on the opposite side like a pack of wolves. Samir leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, his smug grin painted on as though this was already won. My mother sat stiff, pearls around her neck, the picture of authority. Aisha kept her eyes down, her hands folded neatly in her lap, avoiding mine. The judge entered, robes whispering against the floor. The gavel cracked like thunder. Silence fell. The opposing lawyer stood, presenting their case. That my clinic had been financed with family funds, that I had manipulated accounts, that I had betrayed the very blood that raised me. Each word was sharpened to pierce, each accusation rehearsed. And behind it all, I saw Samir's smile grow. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing closer. I could hear the shuffle of papers, the faint hum of a ceiling fan, the racing of my own pulse. I placed a blue folder on the table. "This," I said calmly, "is the truth." I opened it carefully, pulling out documents one by one, tuition receipts from my scholarships, bank statements showing the years I had worked tutoring, transfers proving the clinic was paid for solely from my earnings, contracts signed only by me, taxes filed under my name alone. Each page landed with the weight of iron. Murmurs rippled across the courtroom. Relatives shifted in their seats, their certainty cracking. But I wasn't done. From my bag, I pulled out the piggy bank jar, the same one I had kept from my teenage years, glass scuffed, lid rusted but intact. I held it high enough for everyone to see. "This jar," I said, voice steady, "was my beginning. Every coin in here was earned, not given. Every rupee was saved, not handed down. My clinic stands because I refused to depend on anyone else." The silence was deafening. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the jar. I turned then, looking directly at my family. You told people I was dishonest. You told them I cut corners, that I owed you. But the truth is... I let the words hang, letting the tension stretch taut. I never owed you anything. I built this myself. Samir's smirk vanished. His face flushed, his jaw clenched. My mother's pearls seemed to tighten around her throat as she shifted uncomfortably. Aisha's eyes flickered, guilt swimming there, but she said nothing. I took a breath, letting my voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. I don't want apologies. I want change. The words hung heavy, final, undeniable. The judge cleared his throat, shuffling through the documents, scanning signatures and stamps. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable but firm. These records, he said slowly, are legitimate. Ownership lies solely with Dr. Khan. The gavel fell once more. Case dismissed. The sound reverberated through the room like a drumbeat of justice. My family sat frozen, stunned into silence. For the first time, they weren't in control. The empire they had built on intimidation and favoritism cracked open, the truth flooding in like light through broken glass. I gathered my folder, my jar, my dignity. And as I walked out of that courtroom, my footsteps echoed not with fear, but with power. Cliffhanger ending. I gathered my folder, my jar, my dignity. And as I walked out of that courtroom, my footsteps echoed not with fear, but with power. The days after the verdict were strangely quiet. No more anonymous complaints, no surprise inspections, no whispers in the clinic corridors. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling a shadow pressing against my chest. But silence doesn't always mean peace. My family retreated into their house, curtains drawn, phones unanswered. The empire they had built on reputation and control was fractured. Samir's business ventures began collapsing, creditors demanding repayment, partners pulling out. Relatives who once applauded his every word now distanced themselves, wary of being caught in his downfall. My mother avoided me. When we did cross paths, her eyes darted past mine, as though looking directly at me would mean acknowledging the truth she had fought so hard to deny. Aisha remained silent, but I saw the cracks in her composure, the way her hands trembled when she poured tea, the way she lingered at the edge of conversations, guilt clinging to her like smoke. And me? I didn't feel triumph. Not exactly. What I felt was something deeper, quieter, like finally setting down a heavy load after carrying it too long. I returned to my clinic with new resolve. Patients still filled the waiting room, children still cried, lives still needed mending. But now, every prescription I wrote, every diagnosis I gave, carried a new weight. The knowledge that I had defended this place, that I had earned the right to protect it. The piggy bank jar found a new home too. I placed it on a shelf in my office, not hidden under a bed or tucked away in a drawer. And inside, I began adding something new. Crisp 200 rupee notes, each folded neatly, each one a reminder not just of saving, but of surviving. The jar wasn't just a symbol of where I came from anymore. It had become a monument to what I had fought through. Mariam celebrated with me quietly. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the clinic walls in golden light, she placed her hand on mine and said, "You proved them wrong. But more than that, you proved yourself right." Her words sank into me like warmth after a long winter. And life moved forward. Slowly, I noticed changes. Neighbors who once avoided me now returned, sheepish, offering apologies wrapped in small gestures. A basket of fruit, a whispered, "We're sorry we doubted you." Patients who had left came back, bringing their children, their parents, their trust. Even some relatives began to shift. A cousin pulled me aside at a wedding, whispering, "I always knew you were strong. I just didn't know how to stand up for you then." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As for Samir, his downfall was louder. I heard stories, arguments with investors, public confrontations, debts piling up. The smirk that had once seemed permanent was now a shadow, replaced with bitterness. I didn't rejoice in his collapse. I didn't need to. His own choices had done what my anger never could. One evening, I walked past my parents' house, the same place where I had once stood humiliated with a box of mythi, dismissed and invisible. The lights were dim, voices hushed inside, and for the first time I didn't feel the urge to step in, to prove myself, to beg for belonging, because I had already found it, within myself, within the clinic, within the people who truly stood by me. The humiliation that opened this story had been replaced with empowerment. The courtroom silence where they thought I would crumble had turned into the echo of my footsteps, steady and unbroken. And as I locked the clinic doors that night, the cool metal of the key in my hand, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Cliffhanger of hope. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Have you ever faced betrayal from the very people who are supposed to protect you? Have you ever stood alone against favoritism, manipulation, or abuse of power, wondering if you had the strength to keep going? I know what that feels like. To be dismissed, to be humiliated, to be told you owe your worth to someone else. But here's the truth. Worth isn't something they give you. It's something you claim for yourself. So I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments. Tell us how you stood your ground, how you refused to let anyone rewrite what you built. Because every voice matters. And sometimes hearing one story of survival is enough to remind someone else they're not alone. Your beginning might just start here.